Look at these two planes. On one side, you have the Boeing Dreamliner. It's huge, it's famous, it's a symbol of power. On the other side, you have the Airbus A321XLR. It looks small, like a regular bus with wings. Now, imagine you are an airline CEO. You need to fly from London to New York. Which plane makes you rich? Your intuition says, the big one, more seats means more tickets, right? Well, your intuition is wrong. In modern aviation, the big plane is actually a trap. If you don't fill every single seat, that massive Boeing burns your money fast. But the little Airbus, it's a cash machine. It does the same job, flies the same distance, but costs half of the price to operate. This is the story of how Airbus didn't build a new spaceship. Instead, they took a simple, boring plane and gave it a superpower. With one engineering trick and a calculator, they destroyed Boeing's strategy for the next 10 years. Here's how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. Fasten your seatbelt, check your like and subscription. Let's take off and find out. Strategic trap. What is the middle of the market? To understand why Airbus won, you first need to understand the battlefield. For decades, aviation had two separate worlds. On one side, you had the small single-aisle planes like the Boeing 737 or the standard Airbus A320 that carry about 180 people and are great for short trips like London to Berlin. On the other side, you had the massive wide-body jets like the Boeing 787 or Airbus A380. They carry 300 people and can fly halfway around the world. But between these two, there was a huge gap, a no man's land. This is what we call the middle of the market. Here is the ironic part. Boeing actually owned this market. They had a legendary plane called the Boeing 757. It was powerful and perfect for this middle zone. But in 2004, Boeing made a fatal mistake. They killed the 757. Why? Because Boeing bet everything on the hub-and-spoke model. They believed that passengers would always fly to big central airports, like Dubai or Frankfurt, and then switch to a smaller plane. They thought you didn't mind changing planes. But they were wrong. Passengers hate connecting flights. We hate running through terminals. We hate losing our luggage. We want to fly point to point, directly from our home city to our destination. Airbus saw this shift before anyone else, but instead of spending another $15 billion to design a brand new plane to fill this gap, they did something much smarter. They looked at their existing A321, their standard, boring workhorse, and decided to simply modify it. Engineering. How to fit an ocean liner into a minibus. So, what was the secret ingredient? How do you make a short-range plane fly across the ocean? The answer is fuel, but the problem is where to put it. Normally, if you want extra range, you install big removable fuel tanks inside the cargo hold. It works, but it is a bad trade-off. You get more fuel, but you lose space for cargo. You can fly far, but you can't bring a lot of goods. Airbus engineers did something radical. They didn't just put a tank in the plane. They built the tank into the structure of the plane. It is called the Rear Center Tank, or RCT. It's not just a container. It's fully integrated into the fuselage. This masterpiece of packaging holds an extra 12,900 liters of fuel, without stealing space from your cargo. This change is massive. It pushed the plane's maximum takeoff weight to 101 tons. For comparison, the original A320 weighed about 70 tons. But this innovation came with a huge risk. Usually fuel tanks are in the wings, far away from passengers. But this new tank, it sits directly underneath the cabin floor, right under your feet. Regulators were worried. What happens if the plane crashes on its belly? Will the tank explode? It was a certification nightmare. There were delays and arguments about fire safety. But in the end, Airbus reinforced the structure and proved it was safe. They took a massive engineering gamble and it paid off. Now let's open the calculator, because this is where the A321XLR stops being just a plane and starts being a money printer. Let's look at the trip cost, the total price to fly the plane from point A to point B. Imagine a standard 7-hour flight London to New York. If you fly a big wide-body jet, like an Airbus A380 or a Boeing 787, you have a problem. That plane weighs over 120 tons when empty. It burns about 5 to 6 tons of fuel every hour. When you add up fuel, crew and airport fees, that single flight costs the airline between $45,000 to $50,000. Now look at the A321XLR. It weighs a half as much, about 60 tons. It sips fuel, only about 2.5 tons per hour. The total cost of the same flight, about $25,000. It is literally half the price to operate. But here is the most important number, the break-even point. This is the number of tickets you must sell just to cover your costs. On the big wide-body jet, you need to find about 170 to 200 passengers just to break even. If you sell fewer tickets, you lose money. On the XLR, you only need about 100 passengers to cover the costs. Everything after that is pure profit. Now let's get specific about the fuel comparison with the old Boeing 757. A Boeing 757 is a classical muscle car. It's powerful, but it is thirsty. It burns about 3,600 kilograms of fuel per hour. The A321XLR is a modern hybrid. It burns roughly 2,400 kilograms per hour. That is a saving of 1,200 kilograms every single hour. If an airline flies this plane for 4,000 hours a year, they've saved nearly 5,000 tons of fuel per plane. At current prices, that is a saving of $3 to $4 million per plane every single year. If you have a fleet of 50 aircraft, that is $150 million of pure profit just from fuel savings. This is why airlines are rushing to buy it. Changing the map. Are wide-body jets dead? So does this mean the big wide-body jets are dead? Not exactly. On massive trunk routes, like London to Dubai, you still need big planes to carry 400 people at once. But the A321XLR changes the map for everything else. It allows airlines to play a new game called fragmentation. Instead of flying one big Boeing 777 from London to New York at 1 p.m., an airline can now fly 3 A321XLRs at 9 a.m., 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. The cost is roughly the same, but the passengers are happier because they have more choices. And what about new routes? Consider a route like Dublin to Cleveland. In the past, putting a wide-body jet on this route was financial suicide. You would lose $20,000 per flight, because there simply aren't enough passengers. But with the XLR, this route became profitable. Airlines can now connect second-tier cities directly. We will see flights like Hamburg to Boston, Edinburgh to Atlanta, or Sapporo to Seattle. You might ask, is it smart to use a small plane at big hubs like Heathrow, where landing slots cost millions? Usually, the answer is no. You want the biggest plane possible to maximize the value of the slot. But the XLR solves a different problem. It allows big airlines to keep their slots active during winter or off-peak times, without burning cash on empty big jets. It gives them flexibility they never had before. The success of this plane is humiliating for Boeing. But it is also a lesson for Airbus itself. 15 years ago, Airbus bet everything on the A380 Super Jumbo. It was a double-decker engineering marvel. But financially, it was a disaster. Airbus spent over $25 billion to develop it. They only sold about 250 units in total. They never made their money back. Now look at the A321XLR. Because it is a modification of an existing plane, the development cost is tiny compared to the A380. And the sales? Before the first passenger even stepped on a board, airlines had already ordered over 550 units. Indigo, American Airlines, United Airlines, Qantas, Wizz Air, they all want them. With the A380, Airbus built a palace that no one could afford. With the XLR, they built a highly efficient bus that everyone needs. And Boeing, they have no answer. Their competitor, the 737 MAX 10, simply cannot compete. The Airbus can fly 4,700 nautical miles. The Boeing tops out at 3,300. The difference is the difference between arriving safely in Rome or splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. Why can't Boeing just fix it? They can't. The 737 sits too low to the ground. Its landing gear is too short to fit the bigger engines or wings needed to fly farther. They hit an engineering dead end. To catch up, Boeing needs to design a completely new plane from scratch. That will take 10 years and $15 billion. Airbus didn't just build a plane. They looked at the mass, found a gap in the market, and filled it before the rival even woke up. And that is how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. The passenger experience. But wait, all this talk about fuel and profit is great for the airline, but what about you, the passenger? You might be thinking, 10 hours in a narrow tube? That sounds like a nightmare. Usually, long flights mean big planes with 2 aisles and a lot of space to walk around. The A321XLR has only 1 aisle, so is it going to be a claustrophobic? First, let's talk about the price. Will your ticket be cheaper? It depends on where you fly. Scenario A. On popular routes like London to New York, the answer is yes. Because the XLR is cheap to operate, low-cost airlines like JetBlue or Wizz Air can now fly across the ocean. They will force the big legacy airlines to lower their prices. Competition is good for your wallet. Scenario B. On exotic direct routes like Dublin to Cleveland, the answer is no. You won't get a discount. Instead, you are paying for convenience. You pay to avoid a layover. You are buying time, not a cheap seat. But ask yourself, would you tolerate a thinner cabin if it saves you $200 or gets you home 3 hours faster? Most people would say yes, and Airbus knows it. And that is exactly the question I would like to ask you to share in the comments. I would be very interested to hear your opinion. And if you liked this video, consider subscribing. I'm just starting this channel, but I put a lot of effort into every video to make it clear, accurate and worth your time. And now check out one of these videos. I think you will like them. See you there!